Okay.
Just accept the recording. Good. Good evening and welcome to the Rabbi's Study. My guest tonight is Yossi Klein Halevi, a dear friend and teacher from the Hartman Institute. Yossi is, in my world, the most perceptive and insightful observer and analyst of Israeli society and much of world Jewry, and it's a real pleasure to speak to Yossi from Yerushalayim. Yossi, my recollection of Israel at Erev Pesach are streets teeming with people getting ready for the Chag, thousands of tourists, food everywhere, flowers everywhere. What's it like tonight in Yerushalayim?
So, Ed, first of all, I'm just delighted to be with you. And you didn't mention that we were classmates
Right.
in Jerusalem in 1973, that fateful year at Hebrew U, the year of the Yom Kippur War. So you mentioned the pre-Pesach bustle in Jerusalem. So think more Yom Kippur, because that's really what the streets look like. And it's such a strange moment because really we're in a Yom Kippur mindset right now. All of us, who shall live, who shall die. We're not in the mindset of Pesach Higia, Aviv Higia, Pesach Ba. The spring has arrived and the holiday of Pesach has come. That's not where we are. We're not in the mindset of renewal. Everyone knows this thing hasn't peaked yet. We're all in a state of acute anticipation, if not dread. And certainly the streets here reflect that. We shut down our borders, not hermetically, but close to it, very early on, or relatively early compared to other countries. And so we mobilized quickly. And I mean, Ed, you know Israelis. You remember what Israeli society was like, Erev Yom Kippur, and then literally 12 hours later. This is a society that knows how to mobilize, with one great exception, and that is the Haredim. Haredim are not, as a whole, part of that mainstream Israeliness, that ability to respond uh, intuitively and collectively to threat. Haredim operated at a different pace. They looked to different sources of authority. And as a result of that, they were disastrously late in catching on that this requires a different way of behavior. This requires atomization. And if you think about the Haredi community, they're not a community that values space. They're a community that values the collective. Everyone is always on top of everyone else. And I grew up in a Haredi community. I grew up in Borough Park in Brooklyn, and space was not a value. And if you go into a Haredi neighborhood on any street, you'll bump into people. They'll bump into you. Nobody turns around. No one says, "Excuse me," because it's all part of you just function as kind of one extended restless being. That's the Haredi communal experience. And so they they were late. I would say probably a week to 10 days later than the rest of us. And that week to 10 days has proven to be disastrous. Close to 50% of the patients in hospitals today being treated for the virus are Haredi. The Haredi neighborhoods are hotbeds of the virus. And so there's tremendous social tension rising between the mainstream that's furious at Haredim and the Haredim who say you're persecuting us. Now factor in that today most of the Haredi community does follow the rules, but there is a minority, a not insubstantial minority, that continues to flout the rules. The majority of the Haredim are furious at them. Nevertheless, the images that we see on TV every night are of police fighting with Haredim and breaking up a minyan in Mea Shearim or Beit Shemesh. Terrible scenes. And again, this really is a minority of the Haredi community, but that coming on top of the disastrous way in which the Haredi community missed the initial cues has created just tremendous resentment.
So I know that as Israelis, Chiloni Israelis particularly, but even religious Israelis, generally treat the Haredi world with a mixture of bemused tolerance or resentment. How is the majority of Israel accepting this and dealing with this?
Tremendous resentment, and the resentment, I think, is deserved um, if it's focused. Excuse me, if it's focused on the Haredi leadership. You know, we have a health minister, Litzman, who's a Ger Chassid. And he was interviewed the other day, and he was asked by the reporter, "So how are you feeling?" He said, "Fine." It was before he was diagnosed with corona. And he said, "Oh, I feel fine. I don't read a newspaper." Now, wait a minute. You're the health minister. You don't read a newspaper. He didn't have internet in his home. They had to install internet last week. He's been supervising the corona crisis without internet. Now, this is a leadership that has completely failed, first of all, their own community. They gave their community the worst advice. And as a result of that, they've endangered the rest of us. Now, this problem really reflects on something much deeper, which is a kind of magical thinking in Haredi world about religion, which is the first problem, the first expression of that magical thinking is that a 92-year-old rabbi, and I'm speaking very specifically about Rabbi Kanievsky, who's considered to be the great Talmudic authority in the Haredi world. This You don't go to a 92-year-old rabbi to ask advice on what to do at a time of plague. So they asked him, should we shut down the yeshivas? And he said, of course, you never shut down yeshivas. He didn't know that there was a plague. He lives in the world of Talmud. He didn't know. And so you have a community of 1 million Israelis turning to Rabbi Kanievsky and looking for guidance. Should we shut down our schools or not? So that's the first instance of magical thinking, that someone who is a religious authority, and even granted, let's assume he's a holy man, but that person would then could function as an authority for secular matters. That comes out of this sense of magical religious thinking. And the second source of magical religious thinking is that if I continue to daven, if I continue to do the mitzvot, God will protect me. Now, a friend of mine, a nun, put it to me very beautifully. That, you know what faith is? Faith isn't that God, I believe that God is going to make sure that whatever it is I have to go through will be resolved in a way that's to my satisfaction. That's not real faith. Real faith is knowing that whatever it is you have to go through, God is going to be with you. That's very different. There are no guarantees. And for whatever reason, this plays out in God's plan, and it may not conform with what my needs and expectations are. My faith is that whatever I go through, God is with me. So my sense is that once Corona starts to die down, there will be a moment of deep reckoning in the Haredi world. If I could just say one more thing here, which has really been on my mind as someone who um, I sit at the Hartman Institute. Uh, I'm immersed in liberal Judaism. But what I feel that this moment is in a way a wake up call, first of all for the Haredim and the form of religious magical thinking they need to overcome. I also think this is a wake up call for religion, for liberal Judaism, It is a wake-up call in the sense of the kinds of issues that liberal Jews tend to focus on are not enough to sustain us in a moment of life and death crisis. We need the questions, the old questions of the soul, a personal God. What does it mean to be facing death? These are questions that liberal Judaism, I feel, needs to invest a lot more seriousness in.
Hmm. Who in the Israeli world then, or rather, be broader than that, who in the Jewish world is doing that work, either now under the condition of crisis, or more generally, who are you reading at this point to find strength and find faith?
I think that we are, in many ways, an orphaned generation. We are coming at the end of nearly 2 centuries of of secularism, of secular Zionism, of quasi assimilation, and on the other side of the Haredi or Orthodox counter reaction to that, which has also not been kind to a creating a deep faith. When you're in a very defensive mode, when you're in a siege mode, as much of the Orthodox community has been in, you tend not to be religiously creative. And so I think that one of the great challenges of 21st century Judaism is going to be the resacralization of the Jewish people, reclaiming a personal and collective relationship with God. And so that's that is the call that I hope is going to come out from ordinary Jews, saying, where is this? At a time of crisis, where is the sustenance? Who is the God that we believe in? Where is that God?
So it's Pesach time. Do you see a beginning again of a conversation about a God who lives in history, who affects us in history? Are we far enough away from the Holocaust in order to have that conversation with some seriousness and some sensitivity?
It's a great question, and I'm working on a book about that now, and the book is called The Wisdom of Survival, and it's looking at um, three aspects of the post-Holocaust Jewish reality. And I'm looking at this. It's almost a century since the Nazis took power. Extraordinary.
Right.
And so the Holocaust is now, as difficult as it is for many of us to accept that, the Holocaust is now memory. It's history. And it needs to transition from open wound to to one facet of Jewish memory, a major facet, but nevertheless. And so, what I'm looking at is Jewish is the are three issues that we need to grapple with in the 21st century. The first is our relationship to power, the complexity of power, and how we've come up against moral issues that we could have never imagined 80 years ago. The second issue is our relationship to the non-Jewish world, and how do we navigate the balance between the particular and the universal. And the third really is the question that you're raising: uh, what is Jewish faith? Almost a century after the Shoah, but it isn't only after the Shoah; it's also after the creation of Israel, after the ingathering, after the emergence of the most successful and self-confident diaspora in Jewish history. And so we our generation inherited the the worst nightmares and the greatest dreams of Jewish history. And it happened more or less simultaneously, just before you and I were born. And so the question really is, Who is the God of Israel? And here I would say we need to ask ourselves two questions. First is the question you raised, which is, can we as a people re-embrace the notion in some way of a God who loves the Jewish people and a God who protects and cares about the Jewish people and has some kind of a covenantal relationship with the Jewish people? That's the first question. Another question which Jews seldom ask, certainly not modern Jews, and that is, how can I develop a personal relationship with God? How can God be a living presence in my life? Now, almost the only place where you'll encounter that kind of language is in the Hasidic community. You have it a little bit in renewal, in Jewish renewal, but really you'll find it in Breslev. You used to find it more strongly in Chabad. Chabad, I think, has become much more um, outwardly focused and less mystical and focused on the individual connection to God. So, but you will have it in groups like Breslev, certainly. But why should it just be there? A personal relationship with God is something that we every human being should be, person of faith should be trying to nurture. So that's my personal focus in my own religious life, and I want that to be more a part of our Jewish conversation.
That's quite remarkable, and I'll look forward to the book because you will spark conversations around the world which need to be ignited. And I do appreciate the questions and the challenge that you present. Let me take you for a moment from the sublime to the ridiculous. Before the COVID crisis hit America, at least, we were reading about the government in Israel. And yes, and the story that we read was that an Israeli general decided to betray his troops and align with the other side, and you might actually get a government after 3 elections. And everyone here is saying to themselves, "What?" So, in 3 minutes or less, explain to us General Benjamin Benny Gantz and what the hell is going on in your government.
Okay. So I'm one of the troops he betrayed. I voted for him no less than 3 times in the last year. That certainly qualifies me as a member of Benny Gantz's club. When he went in to negotiations with Netanyahu, I was heartbroken and I accepted it. The reason that I accepted it is, first of all, because we are in the middle of a once in a century crisis and we still don't have a functioning government. And so for that alone, we need to be uh, creating a government. But there's another reason, and that is that 2 weeks ago, just as the virus was accelerating here, we faced our worst crisis of confidence in democratic institutions that we have experienced since the Rabbi assassination in the mid 90s. You had a an unprecedented tug of war between the Supreme Court and the Knesset over who has preeminence. Supreme Court ordered the Speaker of the House to keep the Knesset open in session so that blue and white can take over. And the Speaker of the House, who is a Likudnik, ignored the court and kept the Knesset shut down. We've never experienced anything like that. Factor in uh, an additional um, unprecedented conflict 2 weeks ago between Netanyahu and Gantz, where Netanyahu was saying, I won the election because I received a majority of Jewish votes. And Gantz was saying, no, I actually won the election because my bloc received the majority of Israeli votes, which means he was including Arab votes. Netanyahu was redefining Israeli democracy as being just for Jews. So that was one red line. The problem is Gantz also crossed a red line. He tried to create a minority government based on support of the United Arab List. I know this is getting complicated. The United Arab List is a party that has almost no legitimacy among Jewish Israelis across the spectrum. Uh, Knesset members in the United Arab List have supported terrorism. They are regarded as an anti Jewish party. And so you had Netanyahu on the one hand negating democracy and saying only Jewish votes really matter. And then you had Gantz on the other hand trying to form a minority government with an illegitimate, for most Jewish Israelis, an illegitimate Arab party. And the result was total chaos. And so Gantz saw the country or the political system falling apart. We 2 weeks ago we were in danger of seeing the political system disintegrate. That was the crisis in the middle of Corona. And so Gantz came along as the general, as the soldier, and said, I may be destroying my political career now, and he probably did. He also went into negotiations in a really amateurish way. I won't go into the details, but he blew these negotiations. He could have gone in a position of strength, and so I'm furious at him for that. But I don't fault him for betrayal. I fault him for amateurishness.
So where are you today? Do you have a government?
Almost, almost. They may be signing tonight. So,
Bechol dor vador. So looking from a bigger picture, you remember from your roots out in this world that the American Civil War took place, what, 90 years after, 85 years after the Declaration of Independence, and 70 years after the Constitution. Are we facing the same crisis in Israeli democracy? Having created a state, it's now time to sort of shake out all of the contradictions that are built into Israeli political theory and finally write a constitution and settle this stuff? Or is this going
go
to be the
ahead.
drama?
Look, this has been the question that Israelis have been asking themselves ever since Ben Gurion sank the Altalena in 1948. It was the question that Israelis were asking when I made Aliyah in the summer of 1982, which was the beginning of the Lebanon War, which was the first war that actively divided Israelis. And the summer of 82, Israelis were saying, is this what civil war looks like? It's the question that we asked after the Rabin assassination. Is this the opening pot of a civil war? And we never had a civil war because I think most sane Israelis understand that a civil war will be the last war in this country. There is no picking. There's no picking up the pieces after that. And we live surrounded by enemies who are waiting for signs of fatal weakness, and so it's just not possible. What we do in Israel, what we specialize in, is that we go right to the edge of the abyss, and we stare down, and then we pull back. And that's the experience we had 2 weeks ago here. And Gantz turned out to be the hero. I don't know how much the country will appreciate his sacrifice, and frankly, I don't know how much we should appreciate uh, because of the way he went about it. Nevertheless, he was the guy who pulled us back from the abyss this time. There's always somebody who pulls us back.
So let's conclude with I have two sort of concluding questions because I want to hear a word of hope before we retreat to our Passover celebrations. Um, Tell me how you and your family are coping. What are you holding on to? And tell me what your neighbors what's giving Israelis hope at this moment and strength and ability to get through.
First thing that the first conversation I had with my daughter about this moment was Moria. Remember when you were when you were 6 years old, and we had to run into the sealed room during the first Gulf War. The Betach, of course, she said that's the first thing I thought about. So now we're all in our sealed rooms. Now the whole world is in a sealed room. And so, we have precedent. Now, of course, it's never exactly the same. The sealed rooms were intermittent. It's only when there would be a siren, when there would be a missile coming in, we would run into our sealed rooms. But we have approximations of these experiences. We all remember here those terrible years of the Second Intifada, when Israelis were afraid to go outside. We wouldn't congregate in public spaces because that could draw a suicide bomber. So seeing these empty spaces is eerily reminiscent of other periods, but that also gives you perspective. It helps you remember how awful it was then, and there's always a morning after. That's why we have memory. That's why we have historical memory, is to remember that there's never a definitive apocalyptic ending. And this is a really horrible moment. But it's a strange moment for Israelis because here we are under siege. In that sense, it's a classic Israeli moment. Nobody's coming here. But we're not under attack. It's not about missiles. It's not an existential threat to the Jewish state. Um, and in that sense, I would say parenthetically that this is potentially a very good moment for Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis, because this is Israel's first life and death crisis that is purely civic and not national and identity. And we're all going through it together. I have a lot of Arab Israeli neighbors where I live in French Hill, and my building is almost half Arab Israeli families. And since Corona, I mean, the interaction is always friendly. Since Corona, it's more intimate. And so yeah, we're all going through this. We're all neighbors, and so on some level, what this experience is teaching us is that there's a space within Israeliness that is neutral. Now, the tragedy for Israeli society is that Haredim are not in that space. In some sense, it's easier for me to be in that space with Arab Israelis than it is to be with Haredim. And that's very troubling for me as a Jew. I don't know what it means for me as an Israeli.
So you're going to have to write a new chapter to your book, or a new postscript to the letter to your Arab neighbor, to say,
Yes,
listen, you're stuck in your house and I'm stuck in my house, and we're both afraid of the same thing. Let
right.
let's 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 understand each other. Um,
Yeah, yeah. We'll see how far that goes with my Palestinian neighbors across the wall. That's
who knows?
that's a stretch, But yeah, it's worth a try.
So I have to ask you one more question. Now, I know you as a scholar and as a journalist and as an analyst and as a friend and as a teacher. But the other role that you play in my life is you are my connection for great Israeli music. You are the best.
That makes
Is
me that
you are the
makes me very
bridge.
happy.
You are the bridge between my world of Crosby, Stills, and Nash and the Banai brothers and others that you've introduced me to. And I see behind you your CD collection. You know, most
Almost all Israeli music.
Right, and most rabbis have Talmuds and books behind them. You have your holy text. So, as we're celebrating this Pesach, stuck inside, we have access to each other's music. Give me
Yes.
3 recommendations for Israeli music that American Jews probably have never heard or never encountered that will open our eyes to what Israelis are listening to and to the inspiration and strength that Israelis are gaining from their own music.
I just love that question. So let me suggest, first of all, a song by Yishai Ribo. Yishai Ribo is is a Haredi musician who has crossed over into the Israeli mainstream and is universally loved. He's listened to by secular, by modern Orthodox. He's Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and let me find the song that I'm looking for, which is it's just fantastic. It's about Corona. So that's my here. It's called Keter Melucha, and it's what he does there is he he traces the last couple of months on the Jewish calendar. And Ed, did I lose you? Did I lose you?
No, no, we're
Oh.
fine. We're up. Okay, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Great, because I don't see you.
No, we're okay.
I
I can
don't
hear
see
you.
you. Okay.
Keter
So
Melucha by Yossi
um,
Riba.
what he does is he goes through the Parshat HaShavua. Okay. Can you see? Yes, he goes through the Parshat HaShavua week by week and traces the evolution of Corona. And he talks about Parshat Vayakhel, which is about bringing together the people of Israel. And he says, and here we are, forlorn, and there's no assembly. It's just a beautiful song about faith and a song of struggling between faith and despair. So that's one thing. The second is, of course, Ehud Banai. And Ehud Banai is really one of the greats of our time in Israeli music. And he has a new album called Holech Umitkarev. Uh, it's coming, it's approaching, and anything on that album. The music is so beautiful, and it really is about the cycle of life and death. He has a song about parenting. He has a song where he imagines himself in old age, and he's approaching old age, and beginning to experience dementia. Uh, he has a song about his last visit with one of his friends who was dying of cancer. It's a very personal album, but it will resonate for this moment. It's just an exquisite album. And Holech Mitkarev by Ehud Banai. Now you've only given me one last shot at this, and I'm debating with myself. I would say uh, look up Maureen Nehedar. She spells it in English Maureen, Maureen Nehedar, Nehed, D Dar, Nehedar. Maureen Nehedar does fantastic versions of Parsi piyut. Piyut are the prayer poems of Jews from Muslim countries. And she sings in both Hebrew and Farsi. And her beautiful voice, she does a lot of her own original music to old Parsi prayer. And I think what's so interesting about her is that she has expanded the parameters of popular Israeli music. You now hear music in Farsi on Israeli radio, thanks in part to her. So I would start with these three fantastic musicians and listen to anything that the three of them that you'll find from any of them on YouTube.
So let me suggest, just as an old friend, that in addition to the wonderful work on the journalism on Israeli society and the theology you write, you should continue to write your music column, so that those of us who don't have access to the heart of Israeli music can, through your experiences, find the best. And I appreciate it. Yossi, I want to wish you and your family Hag Sameach v'Kasher, a sweet and a wonderful and a good holiday.
And
Stay
you,
well. Please stay well.
and you,
And hope to see you
and
very,
you.
very
Keep
soon.
well, Ed.
Very, very soon.
And it was just a joy to be back with you. Thank you.
Thank